Welcome, everyone. I'm Franca Iacovetta from the University of Toronto, and I have been the co-host of this day on Emma Goldman, along with Cynthia Wright, and our conference administrator was Lauren Catterson. We had a fantastic day with some fantastic panels where we dealt with a range of topics, including the deportees on the SS Buford who were sent back to Russia, on black anarchism, on Yiddish language, politics of language, and many other papers. So it's been a really exciting day. We're now transitioning to our cultural program, which of course is also an intellectual and a political program, and we're very delighted that A.F. Moritz, Toronto's poet laureate, agreed to an invitation that Cynthia and I issued in 2020, thinking, Emma died in Toronto in 1940. It's an 80th anniversary. Our poet laureate has a relationship to anarchism. And why don't we go ahead and invite him to write an original poem and deliver it? And he very graciously said yes, and so we're really delighted that he's here. A.F. Moritz, or Albert Moritz, is both a professor at the University of Toronto, as well as a poet, an award-winning poet, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. He's also a bit of an historian, a lot of an historian. His main nonfiction work is a book that has been tremendously important to Cynthia and me, and has been cited a few times over the course of today. Along with Teresa Moritz, Al Moritz wrote the award-winning book in 2001 called The World's Most Dangerous Woman, a new biography of Emma Goldman. And it was the first, and it still is the only book that digs deeply into primary sources, into archival documents, newspapers, to write about Goldman's life and political activism in exile, particularly in Toronto and Canada. It won the Joseph and Faye Tannenbaum Prize in Canadian Jewish History in 2003. For Cynthia and I, our project has to do with the way in which subsequent generations, from her death at 1940 right through to the present, how subsequent generations of feminists, activists, artists, novelists, and others have invoked Emma, have remembered Emma, have commemorated Emma. And so in some way, Al Moritz is also a research subject for us, being a writer who wrote about Emma in 2001. And we kind of have a good anniversary for you too, right, in terms of the book.
Absolutely.
So what we're going to do is have a very brief Q&A about the book. And then we're going to ask him to deliver the poem. And as you will no doubt notice, there is a relationship between the book and the poem. So the first question is really to ask you to please tell us about the origins of the book. How did you come to write this book with Teresa?
Well, my knowledge of Emma Goldman goes back as far as I can remember. I come from Niles, Ohio, the birthplace of William McKinley. So by the time I was, I don't know what, I was told William McKinley, our president, was murdered by an anarchist inspired by Emma Goldman. So what is Emma Goldman to a 4-year-old? I don't know. But pretty soon I started to try to find out. And I really sort of fell in love with Emma Goldman. But in my small provincial town, there wasn't much to find out about her. So for various incidents, and maybe we'll get around to some others of them later, I kept pursuing and getting closer and closer to Emma Goldman. And I thought of myself as a radical pretty much by the time I was 12, 13 in grade 9. That worth maybe mentioning just briefly because J. Edgar Hoover's persecution of Goldman was mentioned. Well, in the United States in grade 9, we had to read in American government class a book called Masters of Deceit by J. Edgar Hoover. And it's the story of the FBI's war against the American Communist Party. And this immediately converted me to being a communist. I thought, okay. But from that point on, you know, I knew I didn't really like communism too much, but I wasn't very informed. But from that point on, I read and got closer and closer to radical politics and labor history and Emma. And then I really knew about her and took on anarchism as my politics about midway through university, undergrad of university. And again, through incidents, I can tell about that. But when I arrived here, I was doing various anarchist things. I'm a bad anarchist. I've never been a very thorough anarchist, but I've done anarchist things whenever I can. Well, an anarchist would say you can all the time, right? I shouldn't say that because I've known some heroic anarchists. Believe me, I envy the way they've lived. And the difficulty of it has impressed me. But I was in an anarchist discussion group with a guy who was also a publisher as well as a very prominent literary man. He had created a small publishing house, and he wanted a book about Emma Goldman in Toronto because there's nothing but a few random fragmentary anecdotes that keep being repeated. So Teresa and I said, yeah, we'd like to do that. And we started doing it. We thought it would be a pamphlet because the best we'd be able to do was dig up more newspaper coverage and stuff like that. But the more we got into it, one thing led to another, and there was all kinds of things. You could write a biography out of Candace Falk's papers just by identifying what nobody had ever done, what belonged to Canada and what it told you about being here in Canada. But that and a lot of other things led on to finding many things here that nobody had ever heard about at all. And so finally, we realized she had spent almost 4 years of her life here, which is getting close on to 20% of her life after her deportation, that her time here was crucial and had its own story to it. And not only that, it was totally intertwined with the stories of the deportation, especially of the disenchantment with Russia, then the attempt to make England into a base for acting on that and the failure of that, then the chance to go to Europe to write her autobiography, a retreat from that, then the chance to go to Spain for the Spanish Civil War and the retreat from that. In each case, she came back to Canada, and specifically Toronto. And in each case, she came back with a bigger burden and commitment of poor exiles and refugees to help and try unremittingly. And at the same time, because of conditions, she herself had a harder and harder life. So, I'm just talking about making ends meet. So that's sort of the story of it. We discovered this story. We thought it was not only great research and knowledge about Canadian radical history, labor history, and so forth, but it was a ripping yarn, and we wanted to tell it.
Right. Well, it is interesting because my next question I've called On Emma, You, and the City. And what I wanted to ask by way of that title is that there have been different portrayals of Emma Goldman in Canada and specifically in Toronto. You are the Toronto's Poet Laureate, so you have some relationship to the city. You've been writing and delivering poems about Toronto. Some of you may know about the sugar controversy poem, which we could talk about later. He has written and delivered poems about the pandemic. And so the city matters, right? The city matters to what you're doing. The depictions of Emma Goldman in Toronto have been frustrating to some of us who care about Toronto and care about radicalism in Canada, as well as the cross-border and the transnational connections. The tendency was, for a very long time, on the part of American historians, to suggest that her life pretty much ended once she left America, and is put on that, SS Buford, and is shipped to Russia, has her disillusionment in Russia, gets out, spends the time in Europe, and spends some time in Canada. But she's very unhappy in Canada, a lot of melancholy. Some say, she spent all of her time at Lake Ontario looking at Rochester, where her family was, and, sorry and sad that she couldn't, be in America, where the real action was. One of the things that Al Moritz's book does is to show us an older Emma, she was older at this point, but also very politically engaged, a very active, agitating Emma Goldman, and that's been really important to us. One of the points Cynthia and I have made is that Emma Goldman complained about every city she ever lived in. She also sometimes praised most of the cities that she lived in, and she sometimes had some really good things to say about Toronto. Other times she said what a dull, boring Protestant, church-dominated Protestant a place it was. So that's my long question to you. How did you and Teresa understand Emma's relationship to Toronto?
I think that's a wonderful question. I think if you don't bother to understand Emma Goldman, then you take one of these summary things. Oh, she was always complaining. Oh, at this point she was old and she was disengaged and she was just moping and so on. And none of those things are true. But if you're a little bit more objective, you'll begin looking at her and you say, well, one day she was happy and one day she was sad. So was she, she's like in the old fable from India, 6 blind sages are asked, what is this? And there's an elephant. And one touches the side and he says it's a wall, and one touches the trunk and he says it's a tree, and so forth, right? So none of them can perceive that it's an elephant because they each got their little piece. But if you understand her soul, as it were, her motivation, then all of these things make sense and are an organic unity. She had the highest ideals for everybody, so she could wish for you to free yourself and also just simply to live your happiest life in whatever circumstances you have. And she could just love you, but then she could be disappointed that you would not wake up to this, or she would find you inconsistent because you were inconsistent, because some days you seemed to be at the meeting and you had highest political ideals, or sometimes you were really giving loving fellowship to your spouse or your group or whatever it was. Other times, no. Other times you were just getting drunk and falling back into bad attitudes or whatever it is. So just like a great philosopher or poet, she's at once projecting a visionary possibility of you. What she's telling you is it's not just a hope, it is your deepest essence. So come on, get up on your hind feet and realize it. And other times she's saying, you're failing. So the unity of vision and criticism in her, the unity of exaltation and irony, sarcasm, disappointment, is the same one you will find in Walt Whitman, in Ralph Emerson, in William Wordsworth, in Shakespeare, and it comes from that same kind of source, I think.
Right. One of the examples we have is of Marie Tiboldo, who was an Italian anarchist and stunningly beautiful by every single account, including Emma's. And at first she thinks Marie has got great potential, and then at another point we found a letter where she says, that Marie, she's too attached to her mother. She's never going to be good enough for us, spends too much time taking care of her mother.
Absolutely, that's the kind of thing. And she herself realized she struggled in that with her own self, Okay, you can see, what do we call it today? Work-life balance. What a stupid phrase. But you cannot have a good work-life balance. You can see Jones there doesn't have a good work-life balance. But then you realize neither do I. And she was thinking of this all the time. She was thinking, I'm obsessed with this, that, or the other thing. And generally my political work. Where is my love of life? Where is my time to have a passionate relationship with the latest guy I've fastened my attention on, and so forth. And there was lots of them. And so, so she knew this wasn't an easy thing about human life, and she could get impatient with others, and she could get impatient with herself, but she could also be full of exultation about it. And that's natural. That's unified. That's not a disunity.
Right.
It's like a white-hot coal reacting differently to different circumstances, sort of.
Right, right. And in the book as well, there are a number of the original contributions of research. Again, something that wasn't dealt with by American historians who weren't particularly interested in the Canadian part of things. But we know, thanks to Teresa and Al, that Emma's last kind of major sexual affair happened in Toronto. And with Leon Melmoth, who was an American, an anarchist from Albany, who could cross the border, right, to come and be with her. And Emma lived in a lot of really dumpy apartments, mainly on Spadina Avenue. And at one point, she's trying to find a better place because she wants to have a nicer place for when Leon comes to visit. Yeah. But she basically had a lot of really dumpy apartments until the very end of her life, when she did live on Vaughan Road and finally had sort of some decent quarters thanks to her anarchist comrades. So that's among the things that Teresa and Albert found. They also fleshed out this community of Yiddish, Spanish, Italian, and other comrades, and also fleshed out what's sometimes called Emma's last political cause, which was saving Attilio Bortolotti, an Italian-Canadian anarchist anti-fascist who was up for deportation back to fascist Italy and who probably would have been killed. Emma worked tirelessly to raise money to hire J.L. Cohen, right, to keep him from being deported, and she was successful. And that element of the play, that element of your book, along with other elements, will be in the play, Emma's Last Visit, that's being performed later.
Let me just say one brief thing about that. So Bortolotti lived up until his 90s and continued to contribute with the anarchist community. And a lot of the people into the anarchist group that I referred to that was the spark of this book were friends and acquaintances of Bortolotti. One of them was the last editor of the newspaper Kick It Over, the Canadian anarchist newspaper Kick It Over, which was published one of the major pieces of biography and interview that we know about Bortolotti. So, here we are doing this research and this pops up at us, and I would say, we were this close. We were 1 degree of separation ourselves from Attilio Bortolotti. So that was almost like, me and J. Edgar Hoover winding up in Emma's lap.
Yes,
it's things like that with Emma kept happening to me throughout my life, actually.
Right, and one of the people in the audience is Bob Cates, who, as an American, anti-Vietnam War American, crossed the border into Canada and linked up with Attilio Bortolotti, though you knew him as Art Bartel. He has a number of AKAs or aliases, and you became part of an intergenerational group, right? Emma had been at the center of an intergenerational group in her time in Toronto, and then Attilio, Art replicated that. And we've had wonderful interviews with Bob and other comrades from that time. Yeah. I was going to ask you to read an excerpt from the book.
Okay.
So pick one, just one.
All right, I'll just read something from the very beginning that sort of talks about the themes of it, because that rhymes up with some of the papers today. Okay. The frustrated yet indomitable intensity of Goldman's efforts during the 1925-40 period, and especially in Canada, illuminate many modern and contemporary issues of idealism versus compromise, of aging and living beyond one's time, of the nature of personal fulfillment, of how our social system controls access to public life and permits or denies effective participation. Also, the role Canada played in her later life points beyond the perennial criticism of Canadian political insularity and inertia to a related but universal and far more interesting problem. The Canada of the 1920s and 1930s foreshadowed the present worldwide scramble to mount the hierarchical ladder of control, wealth, and prestige, workers and masses yearning to identify with the haves, to deny self-comfortingly that they are the victims of class war. Just as today, capitalism and the democratic governments in the 1920s and 30s were creating mechanisms to spread wealth and attach more persons to the status quo through economic self-interest. But by these and other means, much of the impetus was taken out of radicalism. Goldman struggled to find ways to oppose such trends, which have since become so widespread that effective radical politics can often seem impossible. What could shake the general conviction in most nations that there is no creditable mode of social organization beyond the present one? Today, it is easy to recognize the plight of shrinking social idealism caught in ever-thickening conformity, but difficult to know what to do. Goldman's Canadian years are in part the story of how prophetically she lived, understood, criticized, and fought this problem, which was then coming into existence in its current form, but which few then noticed.
Thank you. Al Moritz has had a long and distinguished career as a poet and a writer, spans 20 books of poetry and several translations. He's won the prestigious Griffin Poetry Prize, was finalist for the Governor General's Literary Award 3 times, and awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship. His poems have featured a wide array of subjects: ancient myths, late-night cafes, the natural landscape, rage, mortality, worm pickers, abandoned factories, the beauty of urban life. As a 6th poet laureate, he has been pretty busy, so again, we thank you for joining us. And I'm now going to invite you to read your epic poem. This is a 20 to 22-minute poem,
yeah.
So be attentive, please.
Well, I hope, like David Lester said, you know, he was working on his book because the first version of it turned out to be 400 pages too long. Well, I'm just giving you the whole 400 pages. I don't care. Well, I was going to call this poem Living Your Life, with the you being Emma, and I address Emma in here as a kind of friend, lover, and that just taking her own title. But then I decided to call it Inheriting Your Life, because both, did she have the true talent of gratitude, of knowing that she brought down things from the past, and the Haymarket Martyrs are perhaps one of the best symbols of that, and that she was trying to pass things along, and that's kind of what I'm thinking about too. So Inheriting Your Life, homage to Emma Goldman. There in the streams of time, Emma, I trust you will recall the late November evening when you stepped down into Toronto, the immense bleakness of the Canadian National Station, the finally stilled 12-wheeler panting enormously to your left in a sour, ambiguous light. That early winter, flowers of faces, warm-hearted and eager, opened spring to your eyes, a promise of a new field, and the bundle they gave you was like a child already born for you, from you, the pink roses sent you by your newest lover, the one you hoped in to be an adequate love, at last the love of fire and peace, your hope in the world, alone in the world, made real. The pink roses were laid in your arms. Here for you, a sort of new world, all rose trees, all moments of a happy struggle to come, for you to hug and carry under your breasts down the dark platform into solemn, cold immensities of geometrical stone and out into the night. Not alone for now, but with your laughing followers who led you, surrounded you. I almost see them as if strowing palms at your feet. That was 1926. But maybe times mean nothing to you now in the streams of freedom where you play beyond all betrayals, your spirit accomplishing everything, the pure streams of time where you meet true loves amid love set free. There you come across no boundaries, scarred through paper into the poor earth, scarred into minds to stop the divine human body in borders, bind it, make it seem a limit to itself. In your dream, that earth more real than ours, our earth more real than this one we've made to plant regiments of cleated feet on. In your dream, the daylight face of the world we are given, only visible to love if we'd only take it. Maybe you are free of the absurdity, police, prison, that here the beauty of the body is made to be. As you were always free, in a peace surpassing as you understood, even your own understanding. Maybe you're free in death from the indifference of distracted, spiteful swarms of us hurrying to make a cringing treaty with fate, the mediocre. Maybe you are accomplishing the free play of forever joyful struggle there in what we call death. There, invisibly as once visibly here, you are the life of this world, life hidden from us, people who failed to flame up the freedom of love from your repeated kindlings. People, hunched bulks on loading docks, wrapped in rough, filthy burlap with twisted hempen bindings. Machinery or skids of products waiting by the cars to be loaded and shipped. Waiting not far down the tracks from you as the new Toronto comrades engulfed you, a happy flood, and carried you like a spirit in its pinnace, its canoe, on a shining spate, a spring rill of refreshing flame through a magic land to that evening's party. Yesterday they swept me off my feet to celebrate the fact that you and I have survived, you wrote to Sasha. Later, a table beautifully set, as in a legend, an enchanted castle. And the people presented me with a wristwatch, the first in my life. People in Europe are dead to the lot here. They took 10 years off my shoulders. I met Emma Goldman first in a dream. Not dreams shifting in the dark, but the dream, with eyes suddenly open, the one of hunger and homelessness all around, suddenly appearing in the midst of the flowering world of happy childhood. Dream of bondage, opening in the dream freedom. But which is the dream, or must both be the total dream? The dream in me was terror at the prison house, the human-made world, and the dream was the fire-fountaining image of being given, being let be, left to be together because let alone by the termite armies of wardens with no imagine of anything to do but to enlist me, march you, cage up all, impose the gift of idiot rule. Freedom, the image of being let be. What is that image? A world, a garden that is more than a garden? For why a garden at the start? I love a garden. I would not impose my love. There are many I love who want some other fruit of the love of earth, fruits I have scarcely tasted. Does the hunter on bare feet look back in tears to some garden? Was Eden a garden? Let there be also the wild land of milk and honey, pure place for the making of all human goods, many gardens, all gardens possible for those who conceive that excellence. Dreamland of meadows and forests, factory-ravaged, perfect land of my birth racked by big industry, paltry ambition, or the land of mountain passes for trekking alone through peaks from the coast to the plains. Oh, ice in your lungs, eagles circling beneath your bleeding feet, but here in the real, the dream, you will not fail, though you fall and your frozen body is examined by scientists in an alien time. No, beyond death, the adventure always ends in the flowering of the adventure. Land of tundra, muskeg blooming, bystort, starflower, arnica blossoms. Land for standing alone or with a small band to gather the coming in of the geese in great sky arrows, their haggard, stony music, echoes as from a cavern in the sky in the warm, beloved frigidity of spring. to live and make as you desire, according to the image of what you have worked and managed to have the heart to love. What is that? No one knows but you if you'll find it patiently, savagely looking in your heart. Everyone has groped for a tree bowl to steady himself, searching for the moon, looking up through oak leaves. Everyone has shaded her dazzled eyes and has received it, its visit, the sun rising on the ocean or on the treetops. Or was that not the sun, but the great white bird of light, or a goddess that we saw walking on the wave crests, the leaf crests? All have glimpsed it. None have seen it except in the dream they scarcely dare. I met Emma Goldman in that dream. You are a life's companion, Emma. I can't remember a time before I knew some fragments of your story to shelter me. You were a cyclopean trace in a scurrying country of automatons. Rumors of you seemed in those days a ruin left by ancient titans, the true humans, people of the dawn. Once they were here and built and then left tumbled stones. But they were here once. They existed. To those stones a boy could escape and dream there, sheltered in the lee and shadow and legend of a broken column, a toppled altar. That was what fell to me in my hometown, Niles, Ohio, birthplace of the President William McKinley. And I was told in my cradle, as they say, he had been murdered by an anarchist inspired by Emma Goldman. What was an anarchist to a 4-year-old? Who was Emma Goldman? Then soon I began to know. Through the demeanings and lies of the accounts, I could glimpse and love you. I won't tell the story now, the story you know well, of a quest that as it travels through nothingness produces the enchanted kingdoms around it, the sights, the earth of the adventure. It arises in a heart that longs. Where do they come from? A heart that longs, a stream that purls, a bird that sings. The body may sit poised while the heart traverses forests, meadows, and seacoasts, and comes to castles flying oriflammes, to broken chapels. That vision, kernel of love, seeming still in the heart's contemplation, will explode one day in the struggle to break open to the gift of everyday freedom for all. I won't tell you the whole long, quixotic, chaotic romance of my growing close to you. But one day we arrived, my love and I, here in Toronto, to live here, scarcely recalling our scarce knowledge that you had worked and raged, loved and considered in these same streets. Here one day we were charged with the task of writing the book of your presence here. Here we found, searching, that we could follow your work here, your days, your hours. Here, that word, here, beloved to me, with its sound of quiet wind gathering up the scent of woods and prairies, the sound of a step in dry duff or wet malm, always rings to me as a bell of earth and fire. I love it. Here, 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 be here, listen, look, but then close your eyes and hear what is said here. Hear you, Emma, like a gliding, stubborn seed, angry but grateful at every peremptory gust that grabbed you up and swept you elsewhere, always elsewhere. Loving it, you made each elsewhere anew here. In Toronto, you had lived the veneration for the true human you had borne in Kovno, Rochester, Pittsburgh, Moscow, London and Saint-Tropez, Madrid and Barcelona. Did it ever blossom? Let me recall 2 small twin flowers. In Blackwell's Island Penitentiary, thrown in that rusting pot iron man-made hole for a speech you gave in the country of free speech, you learned nursing and were grateful to the government for that year. That gratitude and irony, a sarcasm, and still a pure grace of gratefulness from one who could transform bitterness to hope, that miracle. And how better to think of you than as a nurse, a midwife, a lover, a mother. You said it yourself to Berkman, writing in final disappointment, final exultation, to the one above all, the one for all life long you had hoped in to be the adequate love, the one who most helped and loved you, the one who most failed. The one treasure I have rescued from my long and bitter struggle is my friendship with you. I know of no other value, whether in people or achievements, than your presence, the love you have aroused in my life. You were lacking often, you harsh man, in comprehension of my actions, the motions of my soul that moved them. But that is nothing to the force of your voice since I first heard it in Saks Cafe. Your voice, your voice, your voice, that I hear now and I have heard through half this century of bitter clamorings from shops and jails and tombs. That first astonishment, first great love, that sudden advent of your voice, I hear it now. It's in that moment I was born, am born along invincible through all winds, a woman, mother, comrade, friend. Men come and go in my long life, but you, my dearest, continue and remain forever. Then she had no more hope of their union and had to pull down an utter darkness between them to thwart her desire, end distraction, be again concentrated on the task, struggle, life, and go on as someone who carries a lost love as a true and vanished world into a loveless scar today, a smoking devastation, field of wounded faces with lolling tongues, eyes staring out of cracked frames, seeing what passes, but not caring, or blind, who can tell? The fact is, dearest, she had written, we are fools. We cling to an ideal no one wants, and I am the greater fool. I go on eating my heart and poisoning my life in the attempt to rouse the people. If only I could close my eyes. I cannot help but see my futility, and yet I can't let go. That was in 1934, the cry, the sentence of the perpetual outcast wanderer, I can't go on, I'll go on, the fundamental song. Poverty of generosity, the unremitting holding out of the gift despised. Hope against hope. Hope beyond hope, a silent power, indomitable, enduring, action in impossibility that brings the strange birth under the only star, freedom of love in any moment, the only form of progress, the word that makes the changing world and looks at it and pronounces what it has pronounced already in birds and beasts and flowers and men. Pronounces this over again in words, it is good. This exultation in life, why did we bury it? Was it only a bone of our own skeleton? Will it live again? Was it a seed? Unless it dies and falls into the earth, can it never bloom in living gold and give a home on earth to the birds of the air, now living homeless, naked glory, traveling on their plumes in the air? You remember Saint-Tropez, poor fishing village, beautiful, gruesome legend, where the head of martyred Tropez had landed. Nero's men had cut it off and put it in a rotten boat with a dog and a rooster. And that trinity had drifted on the middle sea in the sunshine, the paradisal breezes, to strike in this gulf and give its name to the place where the playground of commercial nudity would be erected later. Here you absorbed all the beauty of the earth you hungered for, in splendor of cliffs and sea, in the poor people taking joy in every movement and moment of the day that flows to us. In them, the perfect human, never perfect in power, always in the blooming anarchy of their lives, faith in life, hope in the present day, and the expected hard welcome tomorrow. So progress exists. It existed Here in the sun, the fisheries bred on the docks at dawn, lacing of the selvages at dusk, with the children all around in the evening, the first stars, the last supper of that day. Always there is the chance to make a decision for love. You found the perfect human, happiness, in those lives mounted as if small, but vast as a magic gem in a setting of incomparable non-human glory. Our life, so often curbed, bribed, harried, whipped to abet its own restriction. But here it escaped, it leapt up. Here in action, word, and relaxation was the rhythm of true work, rhythm of life, one with the joy of the planets and seasons, effort and leisure, production and play, idleness and natural stewardship, one with the air of beauty that had surrounded you in your desire, in your glimpses of desire's fulfillment since girlhood. You had always lifted your avid mouth and nostrils to that air out of the stink of factories, to the dreamland, the cleanly human earth, clean forests, waters, hills, and meadows, where you saw people move freely to fish, plant, reap, cook, and eat and laugh. Always you heard them. You heard us exclaiming over the newborn and the dying. You watched us sharing the splendor and misery of being women and men. In the ecstasies of speech, in silent jails, in your father's and then your husband's narrow house, in starry liberties of speech with the comrades, in wasting weeks scratching for enough to live on, you watched us with what we ignorantly call unfailing love, a poem with scarcely a meaning unless we say it looking at you. Here at Saint-Tropez, in a home of your own, a gift from your friends, the cottage bon esprit, generous spirit, you lived apart and patiently, unremittingly, you wrote and grasped your life and the present realities of the life of the people, and then returned to Canada to live them more. To Toronto, you returned from Russia, the betrayal, the prison house, and from England, the cold inertia as of a dead physical system, final entropy of an empire of logic, time transformed by pale figures to money. To Toronto, you returned from the France of the joy of life and the abrasions of Berkman, then his death. Sasha dead, a suicide because of age's pain added to life's. To Toronto, you returned from your rebirth in Catalonia, brief seed of the free community of equals, and from its murder. You returned to here, to more harried scratching for poor means, more frantic work to save the harassed exiles. You returned here to proclaim the defeated, forever unconquered, those who love comrades and liberty more than life. Here you too slipped unconquered into defeat. The stroke in Toronto turned you to helplessness. Helplessness of a child, rage at your encagement, moments of peace returning on your bed, immobile amid the busy loves of your many lovers, appalled sometimes at your tears. You died. So strange the silence that all at once came. You were gone, the star of a planet system of fervor. Gone the excitation, joy. You caused to burst and shine from inert bodies, our selves. Disheartened, we fell, silent, fell apart, went wandering off, each alone, like someone who has come to a favorite bench for a rendezvous with a lover who does not arrive. We looked all around, waited, only silence. Then sadly, we went away. Later, today, we returned as you had. We returned on a day that is every day, the day we begin to hear you again. You never died. You were one now as then in the peace of loving fellowship with that power that moves freely in each thing, drawing all time together. It shows its face, love, so that we live now in our buried interior and final splendor. Our betrayal, defeat, and self-defeat, our squalor, that too present to you, Emma, always now in its inner greatness you saw, its own beauty that it has never yet possessed, a seed that is the tree already, while only a dry seed. You arose to me again out of martyrdom, just as you first rose out of the witnesses unto death of the Haymarket. You were taken from Toronto by train as you had come, to lie in Chicago with those martyrs you never met, but they had spoken to you alive and became your love in the words of comrades. They were passed down, as we say. You took life from that life. I never met you, Emma. You were 7 years dead, what they call dead, when I was born, what they call born. But you were passed down to me, and I followed you. I would pass along the presence of you. Let me emerge out of my knowledge of you into life, out of your life as you did out of the rage and peace of those 7 courtly men judicially murdered so long ago and alive in Chicago. Let me live that way with you here in this place where the ancient living people's fishing posts still stand in our dream, in the fecund pure rivers in the world to come, to Toronto. Thanks.
Okay, that was epic. Thank you so much. I also want to acknowledge Olga Pugliese, who has had some relationship to some of this research as well, and open it up for any comments or questions. Just a few minutes, and then we will turn to the reception, and you can talk to Al more informally. But any initial response, comment, question?
Running.
Sure. So, as you know very well, Emma wrote extensively on and talked extensively on like the history of like literature and theater, and it was one of the main ways she actually made money, of course, right? Was giving public lectures. So when you're writing an epic poem about your relationship with Goldman, does this sit in the back of your mind? Does it weigh on you, that she was such an intense critic of, theater and poetry and literature?
Well, I suppose so. You would like to be worthy of her, and that's pretty hard, maybe impossible. But then, as a writer, you're used to that if you take it seriously. First of all, there's all the great poets and writers and philosophers and so forth of the past. Then every year you discover some other culture that you should have known since you were this big and you never heard of before. And then, nature is also greater than you are. So I think one of the things you constantly feel, one of the things I feel is like, if I could write all day long, maybe I'd write everything, at least something about everything that I ought to write about. But some of it I never get to, and I fear I never will get to because of the basic feeling, I am not worthy of my subject matter. I have not yet got to the point where I could do that justice, so I keep quiet about it, and as a result, there's no doubt that I will wither up and die. At a certain point you quit maturing and you go in the other direction. So, I think then you have to just apply the rule, there's, as I wrote in one of my earlier poems, there's no use waiting to be worthy. If you love something, you better just say it, because you'll never be worthy. If you love something worthy, you'll never be totally worthy of it. And then you get the gift. It thinks you're worthy. Myself, I think Goldman might have gone home and said, well, there's this, that, and the other problem with this poem. But on the other hand, she would have really loved it that somebody wrote her that poem, and she would have, so that's
Okay,
what I think.
stand up.
Yeah.
This one here?
Yeah.
Can you?
So, as a historian who does not write poetry, I'm very interested to know how, as a poet, you approached writing a historical book, and subsequently, as someone who had written historical work, how that has influenced your poetry writing after the fact.
Well, I would say, I think this gives me an opportunity to be collegial and express some of my admiration. And I was saying jokingly to Franca or Olga or somebody earlier, you'll find out that the themes of this poem, I hate the word themes, but the themes of the poem are very similar to many things that the scholars said during the day. And as a matter of fact, some of the same quotations. And when I come to talk about my personal relationship or highlight things in our scholarly book about her, I find out I'm using some of the same quotations and incidents that come forward to me to highlight in the poem. So these things work together, I think. So why did I get interested in Emma Goldman? It's probably why when I got the chance to write a book about her, I jumped at the chance. I might not have been very, as the philosopher would say, thematically aware of the core unity of issues that are my relationship to her, but the book helped bring it out, and then the poem was able to go back more to the core. The book brings it out, it brings it to intellection, let's say, and then this is able to go back more to what is the center of the book. So I would say the center of the book is the understanding of the interpersonal, I would say, essence of Emma Goldman. What's really original about her, something she lived, said a lot about, and did a lot about, but didn't really say in the philosopher's way, like she never talked about intersubjectivity like Gabriel Marcel or something like that. But she did it. She did it. And you can see that everything else in her flows from and to that. Her love of people is what comes out in her desire that everyone should be free. Her pacifism and her understanding that anarchism isn't the cliche of just everybody being turned loose to be anarchist and anarchy in the bad sense, but see that we believe in good government. We believe that eventually we will get to being able to do without government. So there's even a sort of British gradualism in her radicalism. All of these things flow from wanting peace, freedom for everybody, which is what she wants to experience, and she wants to experience in the most intimate, basic relationship of the loving couple or experience, and so forth. So I would say then the poem moves backwards from that into, you'll notice there's lots of references to great poetry. There's quotations from Samuel Beckett and William Blake and Octavio Paz and so forth. And there's quotations from the Bible. There's biblical ideas. There's lots of references to courtly love poetry and medieval romance. So when I was learning about Emma Goldman, I was equally obsessed with those things. And I'm trying, that's what I'm doing for myself, I'm trying to put together the unity of my own concerns or obsessions, which a lot of people out in the world would say, no, those are mutually exclusive things, but I don't think so. So I'm investigating that too. So that's the kind of thing that happens in the poem. I mean, that's a pretty diffuse answer, but, you know.
Okay, well, I will take this moment to thank you very, very much. No one had a sneak preview of the poem, so we've all heard it for the first time.
Okay,
It was fantastic. We thank you. If you want to know about the sugar controversy poem, look up Moritz, Red Path Sugar, invited then uninvited to give a poem. So we're going to now end this wonderful session, and you're welcome to, we're moving into a reception. There is wine, there's beer, there's juice, there's water, there's snacks. Help yourself. In the meantime, the Toronto Workers' History Project Theatre Group will be setting up for a performance of the play, Emma's Last Visit. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Oh, okay, I'm glad you liked it. Okay, good.